Welcome to the Right News Network.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emma with the headlines that matter most right now. The Trump administration is launching what it calls Project Freedom Monday morning to escort hundreds of ships trapped in the Strait of Hormuz, where roughly 20,000 seafarers face dwindling supplies as Iran maintains its blockade. The U.S. describes the mission as humanitarian, but Iran immediately condemned it as a ceasefire violation and warned America to stay out. What happens next could determine whether this confrontation stays at sea or escalates into renewed conflict. Continuing on world affairs, gas prices are hitting American wallets hard right now, and the root cause is halfway around the globe. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari has more. Layla?
That's right, Emma. Look, what we're seeing is a direct response to the escalating tensions in Iran. We've had conflict flare up over the past week, and that's spooked the oil markets. Traders are genuinely worried that if things get worse over there, it could disrupt some of the world's most critical shipping routes in oil production. That's why crude prices shot up, and that's why Americans are now paying more at the pump.
Do analysts think this is temporary, or could we see prices climb even higher from here?
Well, here's the thing. It really depends on what happens next in Iran. If tensions cool down, we could see prices stabilize in the next week or two. But if the conflict escalates, if there's any actual disruption to production or shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, prices could spike significantly higher. The markets are holding their breath right now, waiting to see which way this goes.
Layla Nazari, thank you for breaking that down for us. Oil prices are climbing as tensions flare across the Middle East, and the Trump administration signals new military involvement in the region. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari has this. Layla?
Well, Emma, what we're seeing is a direct response to ongoing attacks on commercial shipping. Just this past Monday, a tanker was hit by projectiles north of Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates. That's a critical choke point for global oil traffic. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Agency has been tracking these incidents closely, and they're becoming more frequent. Trump's signaling that he's going to deploy ships to stabilize the corridor and keep commerce flowing.
So how much of an impact are these attacks actually having on energy prices right now?
Look, it's significant. Every time a vessel gets hit, it spooks the market, because traders immediately worry about supply disruptions. You're looking at insurance premiums spiking, rerouting costs going up, and that all gets passed to consumers at the pump. Here's the thing, though. Trump's military posture might actually ease prices in the short term if it deters attackers. But sustained tension? That keeps crude elevated.
Layla, appreciate the clarity on that. Also on the world front, the U.S. is launching a major operation to guide commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point controlling roughly 21% of global oil trade. The Trump administration says the mission will protect innocent vessels caught in regional tensions, though analysts warn the expanded military presence could escalate tensions with Iran. The U.S.-led task force has already begun escort operations. Still on world affairs, Ukraine's military gains are reshaping the calculus for peace negotiations with Russia as President Zelensky tours the Gulf to demonstrate his country's strength. The Ukrainian president's diplomatic push comes as successful strikes on Russian oil facilities have weakened Moscow's economy and environmental conditions. Analysts say the convergence of military pressure and U.S. sanctions on Iran could push Russia toward the negotiating table in the coming months. Still on world tensions, Iran has executed a detainee from 2022's major protest movement. The same week, President Trump ordered U.S. military forces to escort commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. The execution of Marab Abdollah-Zadeh and Trump's Project Freedom deployment signal escalating pressure on both fronts. Analysts warn the combination could destabilize the Persian Gulf and disrupt global energy supplies. Russian strikes have killed at least 10 people across Ukraine today, and Kyiv is claiming it's hit Moscow's Shadow Fleet oil tankers in response. We're tracking the escalating exchanges in the war. Our defense correspondent Marcus Webb has more. Marcus?
Well, Emma, thanks. So what we're seeing here is both sides ramping up attacks on economic targets. President Zelensky announced Ukrainian drones successfully struck Russian oil tankers and a terminal. That's part of this broader campaign to target what's called Russia's Shadow Fleet. These are aging tankers operating outside normal insurance frameworks that Russia uses to dodge sanctions and keep exporting oil. Meanwhile, Russian strikes killed at least 10 people across various Ukrainian locations.
Why is this Shadow Fleet so important to Russia right now?
Look, it's everything to them financially. Since Western sanctions kicked in after the 2022 invasion, Russia's had to get creative with how it moves oil around the world. These Shadow Fleet vessels are bringing in billions in revenue. That money funds the war effort. If Ukraine can damage or destroy enough of these tankers, they're directly hitting Russia's wallet. That's why we're seeing this shift toward targeting economic infrastructure rather than just military assets.
Marcus, appreciate the context. Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced that the United Kingdom is actively discussing participation in the European Union's €90 billion £78 billion loan scheme designed to support Ukraine's reconstruction and economic stability. The initiative, led by the EU, represents a significant financial commitment to helping Kyiv withstand Russia's ongoing invasion and rebuild critical infrastructure damaged during the conflict. The decision carries substantial geopolitical weight. UK participation would signal a decisive shift toward closer alignment with European defense and security strategies following Brexit, while simultaneously demonstrating unified Western support for Ukraine at a critical juncture. Economically, the scheme allows participating nations to spread the financial burden of supporting Ukraine across multiple countries, reducing individual strain while maximizing aid effectiveness. The move also positions Britain as a committed partner in shaping post-war European stability. Starmer framed the participation as beneficial for UK-EU relations. Government officials argue that joining the scheme reflects shared values and security interests, particularly as Russia's aggression continues to threaten regional stability. The Prime Minister emphasized that coordinated international support strengthens Ukraine's position during potential peace negotiations and reconstruction planning. Opposition voices, while limited in the sources provided, have historically questioned the cost implications of major international financial commitments. Conservative critics may raise concerns about UK's spending priorities during domestic economic challenges, though no specific named opposition statement appears in current reporting. The UK is expected to formalize its participation within weeks, pending final government approval. This move would complete a broader pattern of British re-engagement with European security frameworks, including discussions on deepening NATO and EU defense cooperation mechanisms. Remaining with world affairs, Britain's decision to join a major EU loan scheme for Ukraine signals deeper ties with Brussels and stronger backing for Kyiv. Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the UK is actively discussing participation in the €90 billion support initiative. Expect formal confirmation within weeks as Britain repositions itself as a committed partner in European defense strategy. New research suggests the world could solve its energy crisis by cutting methane emissions, with stakes far higher than climate concerns alone. The International Energy Agency says capturing wasted gas from major exporters could unlock reserves double what's currently blocked by tensions at the Strait of Hormuz. Watch for whether major producers actually commit to these emissions reductions in coming months. Spirit Airlines has shuttered after more than 3 decades in business, abruptly halting all flights and leaving hundreds of thousands of passengers scrambling for alternatives. The ultra-low-cost carrier collapsed overnight Saturday despite seeking government assistance, with major carriers now absorbing stranded travelers. Expect significant changes to budget airline pricing and potential new passenger protection regulations in the coming weeks. Time to go deeper. Beyond the headlines, our full analysis of the story shaping the world right now. Day 66 of the Iran war, and President Trump has just thrown down one of the most consequential gauntlets of his presidency. He's announced Project Freedom, a U.S.-led operation to escort stranded ships through the Strait of Hormuz, with a stark warning that any interference will be dealt with forcefully. Iran has called it a ceasefire violation. Oil's already nudging $109 a barrel, and 20,000 seafarers are still stuck in that strait, waiting to find out if American resolve is real or rhetorical. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is this a masterstroke of strategic deterrence, or is Trump walking the United States into a confrontation it hasn't fully thought through?
Thanks, Emma. Look, let's be absolutely clear about what's happening here. Trump isn't starting a confrontation. Iran started the confrontation the moment it blockaded one of the most critical shipping lanes on the planet. Project Freedom is the correct response, and frankly, it's overdue. You've got 20,000 innocent seafarers stranded in that strait. You've got Brent crude at $109 a barrel, hammering consumers around the world, and the Iranian regime is sitting there using civilian shipping as a geopolitical hostage. Reagan understood this. In 1987, Operation Earnest Will reflagged Kuwaiti tankers and escorted them through Iranian-threatened waters. It worked. The Iranians backed down because American resolve was credible. Trump is reaching for the same playbook, and the warning that interference will be dealt with forcefully is not bluster, it's deterrence in its purest form. What I find remarkable is that anyone in the commentariat is framing this as American aggression when it is Iran holding the global economy to ransom. The establishment foreign policy crowd, the JCPOA crowd, have absolutely nothing to offer here except more appeasement. And appeasement is what got us to day 66 in the first place.
But, Marcus, devil's advocate, Iran is calling this a ceasefire violation. If there is a diplomatic track open, even a slim one, aren't you risking blowing it up by sailing warships through contested waters before those talks have a chance? And Sophia, what's your take on this from an economic perspective? Because those oil numbers are serious.
Well, look, Marcus is right that deterrence has a historical track record, but here's what I think he's glossing over. The economic damage is already done in the short term, and Project Freedom is not a guaranteed fix. Brent at $109, WTI at $103, those are numbers that are already baked into supply chains, already affecting transportation costs, already hitting consumers at the pump in the United States and across Europe. Sean Duffy went on ABC and promised immediate relief once the strait opens. And I understand the political messaging, but markets don't work on Trump's timetable. Even if Project Freedom succeeds tomorrow morning, you're looking at weeks before oil inventories stabilize and pump prices respond. The deeper structural issue is that Western economies have allowed themselves to remain hostage to a single choke point, controlled by a regime that has made its hostility to the West its founding ideology. This is a free market failure enabled by decades of energy policy cowardice. Successive administrations, Republican and Democrat alike, refused to pursue genuine energy independence aggressively enough. Trump's domestic energy push is the right long-term answer, but it doesn't solve the problem by Monday morning.
I hear what Sophia is saying about energy independence, and she's not wrong on the long-term structural point. But with respect, that misses the immediate strategic reality entirely. We don't have the luxury of waiting for a long-term energy transition while 20,000 people are stranded in the Strait of Hormuz and the Iranian Navy is attacking ships. 2 vessels reported attacks as this announcement was being made. 2 vessels. This is active, kinetic, happening now. The risk of inaction isn't a slower energy transition. The risk of inaction is that Iran reads Western hesitation as weakness and doubles down. And let me tell you something about the ceasefire argument. Iran simultaneously received a U.S. peace proposal, response, and declared Project Freedom a ceasefire violation. That's not the behavior of a regime that wants peace. That's a regime playing both sides, buying time, and hoping that Western institutions blink. Douglas Murray has spent years documenting exactly this pattern of behavior from authoritarian regimes. They exploit diplomacy as a delay tactic while consolidating military gains. I won't sit here and pretend more talks solve that problem.
Here's what I want to know, and this is the question that should keep everyone in Washington up at night. If Iran does interfere, if there is an incident involving U.S. naval assets or American lives, where does this go? Is Trump prepared for the next chapter? Sophia, where do you see this playing out?
The way I see this playing out, there are really two credible paths and one nightmare scenario. If Iran backs down, and the historical precedent from 1987 suggests they might when faced with genuine American resolve, then oil prices stabilize, markets breathe, and Trump gets a significant political and economic win heading into the domestic debate over energy costs. That's the optimistic scenario, and it's not unrealistic. But if Iran conducts even limited attacks on escorted vessels below full military response threshold, you get a prolonged escort mission, oil stays elevated, and the economic relief Duffy is promising gets pushed further and further down the calendar. The trajectory suggests the markets are pricing in the second scenario, not the first. That 1% rise in oil prices this morning is the market saying, we'll believe the strait is open when we see it.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is the scenario that I don't think is being talked about seriously enough. If Iran kills American sailors during Project Freedom, the political pressure on Trump to respond overwhelmingly becomes irresistible. Not just militarily justified, politically irresistible. And a large-scale kinetic response against Iranian naval and air assets, combined with Israeli strikes that are already ongoing, could produce the decisive end to Iranian regional aggression that strategists have argued for decades is the only permanent solution. But the risk is that Russia and China use that escalation to dramatically increase their material support for Tehran. And suddenly, you're not managing a regional conflict, you're managing something considerably more dangerous. The Trump administration needs to go into Monday morning with crystal clarity about exactly how far it's willing to go, because Iran will probe that line, and ambiguity at that moment is genuinely dangerous.
Marcus Webb, Sophia Reeves, an extraordinary conversation about an extraordinary moment. One thing is absolutely certain tonight. Somewhere in Tehran, someone is staring at a map of the Strait of Hormuz, wondering whether Donald Trump is bluffing. And the terrifying truth is, they don't know, and neither do we. On Sunday evening, news broke that Rudy Giuliani, the man who was once called America's mayor, who transformed New York City from a crime-ridden catastrophe into one of the world's great metropolises, and who stood in the ash and smoke of September 11th when other leaders would have run, is now fighting for his life in a Florida hospital at the age of 81. His spokesman, Ted Goodman, described him as critical but stable. President Trump called him a true warrior and the best mayor in the history of New York City by far. No cause of hospitalization has been given. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Sophia, let me start with you. Is the way Rudy Giuliani has been treated by America's institutions in his final years something that this country should be deeply ashamed of?
Thanks, Emma. And yes, unequivocally yes. Let's be honest about what happened here. This wasn't justice. This was institutional destruction with a political motive. A $148 million defamation judgment against a single individual, an 81-year-old man, for statements made as a political advocate and attorney during active litigation. His law license stripped in not one but two jurisdictions. His finances obliterated, and the mainstream media cheering every single step of it. Tucker Carlson said it plainly, and he was right. The message being sent to anyone who aligns with certain political figures is clear. We will use every lever of institutional power to erase you. Douglas Murray has written about exactly this phenomenon, the Western institutional pile-on, where once the establishment decides you're on the wrong side, there is no proportionality, no mercy, just comprehensive destruction. And the darkest part, Emma, is that the same newspapers offering polite concern for his health tonight spent years treating his suffering as entertainment. I think that tells you everything you need to know about the moral state of those institutions.
But, Sophia, devil's advocate here, Giuliani did make claims about the 2020 election that courts found to be false, claims that caused real harm to real people. 2 Georgia election workers had their lives upended. Doesn't personal responsibility demand some form of accountability? And James, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I don't disagree that Giuliani made serious mistakes in his final chapter. That's not in dispute. But here's what I think Sophia is missing in her framing. The scale of the accountability matters as much as the fact of it. $148 million against a man who has already filed for bankruptcy. That is not proportional accountability. That is designed annihilation. And the data supports that reading. Legal scholars across the ideological spectrum flagged the size of that award as extraordinary. But I want to push back on something else here. The conversation we should also be having is about the first half of Giuliani's career, because as that record is being deliberately buried to serve a narrative, murder in New York City fell by over 71% during his tenure. 71%. From 2,245 homicides in 1990 to 649 in 2001. Those are real lives. Those are real people who did not die because Giuliani made hard, unpopular policing decisions. And the progressive movement that dismantled his policing framework after he left, they own the consequences of that reversal.
I hear what James is saying about proportionality, but with respect, that misses the point entirely about the law license issue. You don't strip a lawyer's license for making arguments in litigation that turn out to be unsuccessful. You strip it for genuine professional misconduct, fraud on the court, fabrication of evidence. What Giuliani did was advance legal theories that powerful institutions found politically inconvenient. That's a different thing entirely, and I'll go further than James will. The bar disciplinary proceedings against Giuliani set a precedent that should terrify every defense attorney in America. If you represent an unpopular client and advance an aggressive legal theory, your license is now potentially at risk if the establishment decides to come for you. That's not a legal system. That's a political weapon. Full stop. And anyone who claims to care about civil liberties and isn't alarmed by that is being completely dishonest about their principles.
Here's what I want to know, because we're talking about a man who genuinely transformed American urban life. And we're also talking about a system that many people believe went after him for political reasons. Where does this end? What does the precedent set by Giuliani's treatment mean for political life in America going forward? James, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, and I want to be careful here, because nothing is certain, is that if Giuliani survives this hospitalization, the legal and financial situation remains completely unresolved, and the Trump administration will face increasing pressure from its base to do something about what is perceived as politically motivated legal destruction of a key ally. The trajectory suggests we'll see renewed congressional attention on the weaponization of barred disciplinary processes and the use of civil defamation judgments as political instruments. Whether that produces actual reform or just performative hearings is another question entirely. But the political pressure is real, and it's building.
Here's what concerns me most, and I think James is being a bit too optimistic about institutional self-correction. What history tells us is that institutions do not voluntarily limit their own power once they've demonstrated they can use it this way. The risk here is that Giuliani becomes a warning, not a turning point. The next lawyer who might represent an unpopular client, the next mayor who might pursue unpopular but effective policies, looks at what happened to Rudy Giuliani and makes a different calculation. That chilling effect on legal advocacy, on political courage, on civic leadership is the real long-term damage, and it's damage you can't measure in a court judgment.
Sophia Reeves, James Chen, a sobering and important conversation. One thing's certain tonight. Somewhere in the institutions that spent years dismantling Rudy Giuliani, nobody is doing any serious soul-searching.
That wraps up today's top stories. I'm Emma. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.